No one could have predicted what would happen on that fateful flight. The tension started building the moment Karen stepped into the boarding area. She was a woman of mystery, carrying an air of confidence, yet something about her seemed off. Karen had been claiming to be pregnant for weeks now, but on this day, she was flying from New York to Los Angeles, and something about her appearance made the flight attendant, Sarah, skeptical. Karen's claims of pregnancy didn't seem genuine, and Sarah's sharp eye picked up on the details. She wasn't convinced. As Karen took her seat, Sarah, who had been working with this airline for years, made it her mission to keep an eye on her. What happened next would change everything. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Sarah moved toward Karen, her face full of disdain. She couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was hiding something. With a cold tone, Sarah questioned Karen about her pregnancy. "Are you really pregnant, or are you just trying to get special treatment?" she asked in front of other passengers. Karen, taken aback, attempted to defend herself, but the snide look in Sarah's eyes made her feel small. "I am pregnant," she retorted, raising her voice slightly. But Sarah wasn't buying it. The atmosphere became charged as the exchange escalated. Passengers glanced around, unsure of what to make of the heated argument unfolding before them. And then, without warning, Sarah made a decision that would shake the entire flight. She called for security to escort Karen off the plane. The passengers were in shock, some recording the incident on their phones. The flight attendant stood her ground, saying, "A woman like you doesn't deserve to fly with this airline." The plane was suddenly divided, and the tension in the cabin grew. What had just happened? 2 days later, the same flight boarded again. Passengers began settling into their seats, and to their surprise, the flight attendant, Sarah, was there. But there was no sign of Karen, the woman who had been thrown off the plane for allegedly faking pregnancy. The flight attendants, passengers, and everyone who had witnessed the altercation just 2 days earlier were now taking their seats. No one expected to see Karen again. As the doors closed and the plane began to taxi, something unexpected happened. The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an important update before takeoff." The passengers grew quiet as the announcement continued. "We'd like to inform you that Karen, the woman who was removed from this flight 2 days ago, has now purchased this airline." The room was stunned. The same woman who had been humiliated just days earlier was now the owner of the very airline that had kicked her off the flight. The realization hit everyone like a wave of disbelief. Sarah, standing near the galley, froze. She had no idea what was coming. The whispers around the cabin grew louder as passengers looked from one another, trying to make sense of this shocking turn of events. And then, as the realization sank in, Karen entered the plane. She walked confidently toward the front, her eyes scanning the cabin. It was the same Karen, but now she exuded a different aura. Something had changed. Karen turned to Sarah, her eyes locking onto the flight attendant who had once shamed her. A silence fell over the cabin. Everyone was waiting for the confrontation to unfold. The tension on the plane was unbearable. Karen, the new owner of the airline, walked toward the front of the cabin with a calm confidence. She looked like someone who had it all, polished, composed, and almost regal. Sarah, on the other hand, was barely holding it together. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything that was happening. The passengers could barely believe their eyes. The woman they had seen being thrown off the flight just days earlier was now walking like she owned the plane. It was surreal, and they couldn't help but stare. Sarah, still shaken by the news, tried to steady herself. Karen stopped at the front, and her gaze met Sarah's. The flight attendant felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she could sense that Karen wasn't just a regular passenger anymore. Karen stood still for a moment, allowing the silence to hang in the air. Then, she spoke. "You must be Sarah, the flight attendant," she said, with a calm, almost mocking tone. "I'm glad to see that you're still here." The entire cabin held its breath. No one knew what was about to unfold, but everyone knew this encounter was about to become a turning point. The situation was starting to feel uncomfortable for everyone. Some passengers exchanged glances, while others whispered among themselves. Sarah couldn't help but feel exposed, and she knew the consequences of her earlier actions were about to catch up with her. As the plane soared through the sky, Sarah remained at the front, nervously avoiding Karen's gaze. It was impossible to ignore the woman now sitting just a few rows ahead, surrounded by a few important-looking people. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Then, suddenly, Karen stood up and addressed the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you're all wondering why I'm here today." "Well, I'm here to set things straight," she began, her voice steady and commanding. The passengers listened intently, sensing that something big was about to happen. "2 days ago, I was treated unfairly," Karen continued. "A flight attendant made assumptions about me, and I was humiliated in front of all of you. But that's not why I'm here today." She turned her gaze to Sarah, who was standing off to the side, her hands nervously wringing together. Karen's eyes softened slightly. "I want to make something clear to you, Sarah," she said, her voice quieter now. "I'm not here to get revenge. I'm here to offer you something better." The entire plane was silent. Passengers looked from Karen to Sarah, unsure of what would come next. Karen took a deep breath before speaking again. "I forgive you," she said, "but I need you to understand that your actions were wrong. It wasn't just about me. It was about how you treated me because of what I looked like, and how you assumed my worth based on a single interaction." Sarah's eyes widened in shock, and she immediately understood what Karen was getting at. The guilt that had been building up within her came crashing down. She wasn't just being scolded. She was being given an opportunity to reflect on her actions. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Sarah said, "I'm sorry. I was wrong." The tension in the air seemed to lift slightly, though the entire cabin was still in disbelief. What had just happened? No one could have seen this coming. The flight continued, but the air had shifted. Karen's words lingered in the minds of the passengers, especially Sarah. The flight attendant, once so sure of herself, was now questioning everything she thought she knew. But Karen wasn't done yet. Later in the flight, just as passengers began to relax again, Karen made another announcement, this time directed at Sarah. "Sarah, I've been thinking about your apology, and I think you deserve a chance to make things right," Karen said, her voice carrying through the cabin. Everyone went quiet again, anticipating what would happen next. Was this some kind of test? Or was Karen truly going to offer Sarah a chance to redeem herself? "To show that I'm sincere in my forgiveness, I'm offering you a chance to stay on with this airline," Karen continued. "I've spoken with the board and we've decided to let you keep your job, but there's a condition." Sarah was on edge now. What could the condition be? Would she have to change something about herself? Would she be forced to apologize publicly? Karen smiled. "The condition is simple. You need to treat every single passenger with respect, no matter their appearance, background, or income level. Treat everyone equally, Sarah." The passengers, who had been watching the exchange unfold, nodded in approval. It was the right message, one that everyone could get behind. As the flight neared its destination, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Karen's words. For the first time, she truly understood the weight of her actions and the harm they had caused. She had acted out of bias, assuming Karen was nothing more than a poor woman based on her appearance. But in reality, Karen was far from what she had imagined. As Sarah walked through the cabin, her eyes met those of the passengers, many of whom had witnessed the earlier confrontation. They no longer looked at her with judgment, but with something else. Sympathy, maybe even understanding. They could see that Sarah had learned something valuable today. Karen had given her a chance to change, and Sarah knew she couldn't waste it. By the time the plane touched down, Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She wasn't just walking off the plane as a flight attendant. She was walking off as someone who had been given a second chance, and she intended to make the most of it. But she wasn't the only one who had learned something today. The other passengers, too, had been reminded of an important lesson. Never judge someone based on appearances. And as the plane came to a stop, they all knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. As the flight attendants prepared to disembark, Sarah stood by the door, waiting for the last of the passengers to leave. She felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. Would Karen keep her word? Would she really be able to continue working here? When the last passenger left, Karen remained behind. She approached Sarah with a smile, but this time it was different. It wasn't smug or mocking. It was genuine. "I meant what I said," Karen told Sarah. "You have potential. Just remember, your actions define you, not your job title or your paycheck." Sarah nodded, still processing everything that had happened. As Karen turned to leave, she added, "And Sarah, remember, don't ever judge someone by their clothes or their background. We all have our stories, and we're all deserving of respect." With that, Karen walked off the plane. Sarah stood still for a moment, thinking about her future, and wondering how she could make amends for the past. Over the next few weeks, Sarah took Karen's advice to heart. She began to treat every passenger with respect, no matter their appearance or demeanor. She started to take the time to listen, to understand. And with every small act of kindness, she felt a little lighter. Word began to spread about Sarah's change in behavior. Some passengers noticed, and they were impressed. They could tell that she was no longer the same person who had once judged them based on superficial traits. One day, Sarah was in the middle of serving drinks when she saw a familiar face. It was one of the passengers from that fateful flight, the one who had recorded the video of the confrontation between Karen and her. The man smiled at Sarah and gave her a nod of approval. "Good job," he said. "You're doing better." It was a small moment, but it meant the world to Sarah. She was starting to redeem herself, slowly but surely. But she knew the road to redemption wouldn't be easy. There would always be people who remembered her past mistakes, but as long as she kept trying, kept learning, and kept growing, she knew she was on the right path. As time passed, the airline underwent a transformation. Under Karen's ownership, the company started to prioritize customer service and inclusivity. Karen's vision for the airline was clear. She wanted it to be a place where people felt valued, no matter their background. Sarah continued to work for the airline, and though the path was not always easy, she knew she was making a difference. She had learned from her mistakes and was determined to be a better person and a better flight attendant. Karen's ownership of the airline marked the beginning of a new era. The focus shifted toward treating all passengers equally, regardless of their background. And with every change that was made, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, Sarah was proud of the work she did, and she knew that Karen had played a pivotal role in helping her find her way. As the months went by, Sarah's transformation became evident. Her colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor, and passengers began to appreciate the kindness she showed them. One day, Karen came to visit the airline, and she made a special point of stopping by to see Sarah. "You've come a long way," Karen said, her tone warm and approving. Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." Karen nodded, a glint of pride in her eyes. "We all have our moments, Sarah. What matters is how we learn from them." And as Karen walked away, Sarah stood there, feeling like she had finally found her place. She had learned one of the most important lessons of all, that true worth isn't determined by what others think of you. It's defined by the way you treat others. The story of that flight, and the lessons learned from it, would stay with Sarah for the rest of her life. And as she looked out over the horizon, she knew she was ready for whatever came next.